Bandwidth for Changelog is provided by Fastly. Learn more at fastly.com. We move fast and fix things here at Changelog because of Rollbar. Check them out at rollbar.com. And we're hosted on Linode servers. Head to linode.com/changelog.
This episode is brought to you by Gauge. Gauge is a free and open source test automation tool by ThoughtWorks with a goal of taking the pain out of test automation for acceptance tests. To help with this, Gauge supports specifications in Markdown, which are easy to read and easy to write. Reusable specifications to simplify your code, which makes refactoring easier, and less code means less time maintaining your code. And finally, integration. Use Gauge with your favorite tools and IDEs in the ecosystem of your choice, like Selenium and Sahi Pro, CI and CD tools like GoCD, Jenkins, Travis, and IDE support for Visual Studio, VS Code, IntelliJ, and more. Head to gauge.org/JSParty to learn more and give it a try. Once again, gauge.org/JSParty.
Welcome to JS Party, a weekly celebration of JavaScript and the web. Tune in live on Thursdays at 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific at changelog.com/live. Join the community and Slack with us in real time during the show at changelog.com/community. Follow us on Twitter. We're at JSPartyFM. And now on to the show.
Welcome to another fantastic episode of JS Party. I'm your host this week, Nick Nisi, and today I'm joined by a very special guest, Mr. Ives van Hoorne. Ives, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, my name is Ives van Hoorne, and it's super cool to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, we're really excited to have you here, and we're talking about a project that you've created and maintained called CodeSandbox. So for anyone in our audience that hasn't heard of that, can you give us a quick summary of what CodeSandbox is?
Yeah, so CodeSandbox is an online editor where you can start web application projects like a React project or Angular or Vue project. And the cool thing is that whenever you save the project, you can share that URL with others and they can work on it as well. They can fork it or they can work on it with you together. So yeah, that's CodeSandbox in a very summarized way.
Yeah, very cool. So it's basically an online environment for running JavaScript projects of all different shapes and sizes.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. So some of the things that I'm sure you get asked about all the time, but where did this idea come from for CodeSandbox?
Yeah, I think that's a nice story. So I think now 3 or 2 years ago, I was working full-time for a company called Katawiki. And we were converting our Ruby on Rails pages to React. So we were on Ruby on Rails 2, and we were converting them to a kind of single page application. And I was doing this with some coworkers. And at some point, I went on a vacation to St. Ives, and I didn't have my laptop with me. So at that point, I started getting questions from my coworkers about React or about React in combination with an NPM library. And I didn't really have any way to answer their questions because I couldn't spin up my local environment to test what they meant. So I had to kind of get their code snippets from Slack, put them through an interpreter in my head, and then give back the answers. And it was pretty hard to do. My interpreter is not that good. So that's when the idea came with, what if I put the local development environment on the web in a very accessible way? Then you would be able to access their code snippets from anywhere, even if you're like on your mobile phone or if you're don't have your working laptop with you. So that idea kind of came into my head and I didn't do anything with it until I started studying. I started going to university and we started getting lectures about Java development. And I found that the first 2 lectures were like, okay, this is pretty interesting, but at some point it started to get pretty boring. So I went to the ideas that I wrote down and I started working on the first one that came up, and that was an online code editor. And I started working on it during the lectures, and we started getting more lectures, and I started working more and more. And at some point, I got very enthusiastic. I started to invite my friend Bas to help with me, and we started to work on it more and more. And in April we released it with not many intentions. We weren't expecting a lot of response, but the response was much bigger than we expected. And that's kind of how CodeSandbox started.
Wow. So give me a time frame. April, is that of 2017, 2016?
That's a good question. 17, yeah.
Cool. And out of the box, did it just have support for React?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I initially wanted to call it React Sandbox, but then I saw that the domain CodeSandbox was free, and I thought, okay, let's not limit ourselves to one framework. So we called it CodeSandbox. But initially, for the first 2-3 months, I think it was only in React, and the reason for that was that we wanted to kind of polish the experience as much as we could. So if we only support React, our possibilities get less, and we can just focus on making this React experience perfect. And then once we think it's perfect, we can move on to other things. And that's still something that we follow right now.
Wow, very cool. So that's a really interesting start to the project. You had this problem, and you thought, I'll just create my own online environment and basically go from there. Definitely the hacker way of thinking about that. So that's awesome. And we've all benefited from it now going forward. But it has grown into so much more than that. It obviously supports anything, really, it seems. It supports much more than React at this point. And what led you to that, to supporting more projects like Angular and Vue and Preact and others? What was the motivation for adding support for that? Was it just to be kind of a more useful tool for a greater number of people?
Yeah. Once we started with React and it got more popular, we started to get more questions from other people, like from the Vue community, if they could use Vue in CodeSandbox, and our GitHub issues were piling up with these kind of requests. And the initial version of CodeSandbox was super simple. We execute all the code in the browser. So we had to have a kind of bundler in the browser where it supports multiple files. But it was fairly simple, where we would transpile the code using Babel and then evaluate it. And we would do this for every file. But once we wanted to get Vue support, we needed to rewrite the bundler to support .vue files and maybe Webpack loaders. So we had this idea that we first wanted to get React very good, so to say. And once we have more resources, I start working on this new bundler in the meantime. And once that was out, once we had this bundler, it was super easy to start supporting Preact, Angular, and Vue. And that's kind of the way that we started doing things. Once we think that this experience is good enough, we put more time into kind of rewriting some stuff to make it the new frameworks or other frameworks doable, and then start kind of implementing it for them as well. And that's how it kind of went.
Very interesting. So I want to dig into that a little bit more with how the bundler actually works. So the code that it's pulling, I assume it's pulling from, is it like npm or unpackage, and then doing all of that bundling locally in the browser?
Yeah, that's it. That's kind of it. It's so we've had many iterations for making npm packages be supported in the browser, because npm packages are huge. If you see an average React project, it can have like 800 megabytes of node modules. And then you have to support that in the browser, and you don't want everyone that opens a project to have to download 800 megabytes. That would be the worst kind of web application you can build. So yeah, we had to take a different approach. In the first version, we pre-bundled dependencies using Webpack. So we created a Webpack DLL bundle, and for every entry point, we had a separate function exported. That worked for some time, but when we started supporting other frameworks like Preact relies on aliases. And since we were using a pre-generated bundle, aliases didn't really work because those were pre-computed. So we started to move to something like you mentioned now, unpackage. So for every dependency request, for every file request, we did a request to unpackage to download the file. And now we have a bit more advanced system where we use some serverless functions to pre-compute the dependency graph, and also pre-compute which files are probably needed by the sandbox. and then we cache that result. So we send one big JSON blob with the probable files that are needed, either by checking from the entry point and then traversing the AST and the dependency graph, including all the files of that, or by just thinking like, oh, if this file ends with .min.js, we probably don't need to include it in the bundle. And it works now that it takes this big JSON file and uses those files. And for every file that was not accounted for in the JSON file, we do a separate unpackaged request. That's how it currently works.
Oh, wow. Very cool. So it has some kind of algorithm that it runs then to try and figure out, based on what you said, the most probable files that the project will need or the sandbox will need, and then bundles those and sends them down and is able to run from there.
Exactly. Yeah, that's kind of, pre-computing the files needed. Yeah, that's exactly it.
Very cool. So that's kind of how I got started with CodeSandbox a little bit. Is about a year ago, I was one of those people making a request for another project to be supported. I was trying to get Dojo supported on there.
Yeah.
And, that was a very fun learning experience getting that going. But Dojo is a supported project on there now, and it's very, very fun and very nice being able to not only share code snippets, but also like use CodeSandbox as a tool for bugs and things like that, where we can have a reproducible environment immediately from users, or be able to pass that around.
Yeah, I was so impressed by your pull request, because all the templates that were kind of created before were created by me, and you just looked at the code and started to do a pull request for Dojo support, and that was super. Yeah, I was super impressed by seeing that, and that's the power of open source. People can build their own things, and we can merge it in. That's really cool.
Yeah, it was really great, and the code was really easy to follow along. So it's definitely a good project to take a look at if you're looking to get into open source. And with that, it seems like the one thing that I did notice with it is there's a lot of different technologies in there. Do you want to talk about what you built CodeSandbox on?
Oh, yeah. So CodeSandbox was a learning project for me. So the server is not written in Ruby on Rails or JavaScript. It's written in Elixir, in Phoenix. So I had to rewrite the server like 3 times to get to grasp the functional programming patterns. But now I think that we have a pretty okay server. But the server is in Elixir. Then we have some microservices for example, importing GitHub repositories. Those are in Node. The front end is in React and JavaScript in general. The bundler is just in JavaScript, vanilla. And then the database is Postgres, and we have 2 Redis stores. And the cool thing about implementing the server in Elixir is that Elixir is a language that is super concurrent. When you have a normal Elixir application running, you have like 10,000 processes running, and they communicate with each other. And that makes an Elixir server very concurrent, and it can handle so many requests with so little resources at the same time. And this allowed us, for example, we have a functionality called CodeSandbox Live, where you have live collaboration, kind of like Google Docs. And this allowed us to have our Elixir server handle everything of this with not that many resources. We now have like 400 WebSocket connections at the same time, and the server is not really breaking a sweat, I think, at least from what I noticed. So I fell in love with Elixir. It's a really cool language.
Very cool. That is a part of it. I haven't looked at it. The backend is not open source. Is that correct? It's just the front end and the microservices?
Yep, that's true.
Cool. And yeah, on the front end, I noticed, so it seems like it's written in, with frameworks specifically, it's written in React, but also it's using Flow in a lot of areas and a little bit of TypeScript.
Yeah, this is kind of, this is the evolution of our application. So it started with Flow. Then I didn't have that much discipline. So some parts are not in Flow and just JavaScript. And we are now trying to make the move to TypeScript. We're slowly rewriting the code base to TypeScript, especially for some reasons. In the coming months, we want to grow a team that works on CodeSandbox, and using TypeScript I think that helps with onboarding new people to get started with the code base really quick. Another reason is that we since recently have VS Code running in CodeSandbox, and VS Code is in TypeScript. So we now have a kind of an interoperability layer between VS Code and CodeSandbox code base, but would be better if we would have CodeSandbox in TypeScript, VS Code in TypeScript, and then make them interoperable with full type definitions. That would be super nice. And it's generally for every library that we have, we opted to go for TypeScript because it's very easy to generate TypeScript definitions. And so, we're now in this big mix of different things, and it's counterintuitive. So we want to move everything to TypeScript.
I will say that obviously I'm a pretty big fan of TypeScript, and I think that it's a great solution for a project like this, and for really any JavaScript project in my in my book. But for this, I think that it's really awesome because there was type definitions, not type definitions, but there's flow in there. And so when I came in and started looking at the code, I was able to get a little bit of help with understanding what things were and kind of how things flowed through the application and where to look for things. And I think that having those types there really helped with that. And I think that adding TypeScript will probably only make that simpler. So that's awesome.
Yeah, I'm a fan of TypeScript, how they handle big projects and the speed of it. It's really cool.
Yeah, definitely. Awesome. I can't wait to help out with that too. So you touched on a few features of CodeSandbox. You mentioned specifically things like live support and VS Code and those. And I wanted to talk a little bit about those and what features are available within CodeSandbox. So can you give us an idea of that?
So you can, for CodeSandbox, you can embed CodeSandbox in Medium or any place. We have a separate application of CodeSandbox that's for embeds. You can also, it's really cool. It's because it's a lower application size, so that makes it easier. We also support importing from GitHub repositories. And the cool thing of this is that when the GitHub repository updates, we automatically update the sandbox, so they stay in sync.
That is the single coolest feature, I think, of CodeSandbox is being able to keep it in sync with GitHub repositories and just being able to say, I have some example code here, push it to GitHub, and then, here is a CodeSandbox link to it. It's just so nice and easy.
Yeah, I really am a fan of this because it's also, it's a kind of like an immutable system where people cannot edit the sandbox directly. And this allows us to sync it with GitHub. A nice edit thing that we added, I think, half a year ago or maybe a bit longer is that you can also commit back to GitHub. So if you fork the sandbox and make changes, you can click on commit and then it will create a new commit in the GitHub repository, or you can create a pull request, or you can create a new branch and fork the GitHub repository, those kind of things. Those are kind of the new things in GitHub support.
I did not even know this. I did not know that you could commit right back to GitHub from CodeSandbox.
Yeah, it's super cool. Yeah, but that is one of the nice new things of CodeSandbox. Another thing that you can do is create a live session. So for a sandbox that you own, you can create a live session and you can share this URL with others. Everyone with the URL can then join the sandbox and you can see each other editing live at the same time. But there's also a special mode called classroom mode. And if you enable that mode as the owner, you can say who can make edits and who cannot make edits. So you can kind of use it in a workshop scenario, for example, or in any other kind of scenario where you just want to show someone how something works and they can follow along, fork along the way. And you can give them access to edit as well. Another feature that we have is dashboard. So you now have a very cool dashboard where you can see all your sandboxes and you can organize them as kind of in a Google Drive way in different directories and folders, and they can be nested. A cool thing is that you can also share directories with teams. That's a new thing. So you can create a team, you can invite people to the team and they will get a notification that they are invited to the team. And everyone that has the same directory in the team can, if someone opens a sandbox that's owned by the team and someone else in the team opens the same sandbox, they automatically go in a live session together. So they can kind of work together in a live way.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's kind of like an unnoticed feature, I think.
Yeah, that's really cool. So that live session feature, how does that work? I assume that's doing it over WebSockets, but is it using some kind of like CRDT or conflict-free replicated data type or something along those lines?
Yeah, we're using operational transforms. I was at the start when I wanted to develop this feature, I was considering using CRDTs, but CRDTs is kind of like a new way to do conflict resolution. And operational transforms was there, I think, already since the 80s. So there was more documentation on operational transforms, especially since the Google Drive team has written so many documentation on how they made operational transforms work for the Google Doc scenarios. So I decided to go with operational transforms because that was most documented. And that's how it currently works. You have one kind of host it's a kind of peer-to-peer system. And you have one host that has all the state. And then when people make edits, they communicate with the host and maybe time travel to resolve all conflict.
This episode is brought to you by our friends at Rollbar. Check them out at rollbar.com/changelog. Move fast and fix things like we do here at Changelog. Catch your errors before your users do with Rollbar. If you're not using Rollbar yet or you haven't tried it yet, they have a special offer for you. Go to rollbar.com/changelog. Sign up and integrate Rollbar to get $100 to donate to open source projects via Open Collective. Once again, rollbar.com/changelog.
So some of the things that I wanted to talk about a little bit more just going forward into the next section is maybe a little bit about some struggles. It seems like you're doing a lot with a lot of different things, a lot of different technologies and a lot of different paradigms like operational transforms and all sorts of different languages and frameworks. And so kind of talking about maybe some of the challenges with that or some of the harder parts of a project like this.
Yeah, I mostly started using these technologies because my way of learning is by doing. So I need to have a goal in mind when I want to learn a new technology. And it doesn't always, it's not perfect. For example, the Elixir server it's pretty hard to get contributions in Elixir because you're building an application for a JavaScript community, and naturally the JavaScript community will be most interested in contributing. And if you have your server in Elixir, then there is this kind of learning curve that they have to go through first before they can start contributing. And for the same reason, it's pretty hard to find people interested in joining the team knowing of Elixir. So that's one of the, if I would start CodeSandbox again, maybe I wouldn't have written the whole API server in Elixir, even though I do love the language. But this is kind of like a unique situation where you're building something for developers, and the developers in this case are not Elixir developers. So that's one of the things. I also have some other things that were kind of hard. For example, for CodeSandbox Live, I wanted to do it before we release it. So the CodeSandbox Live that we have currently was my second try. The first try was I was researching, and like I said before, operational transforms, there's lots of documentation available, and it started to get a bit overwhelming. So I canceled my research for that feature at some point, and then opted in for going for a more basic version. So the idea was that when someone is editing the file, that no one else can edit at the same time. But I started showing it to Kent C. Dots, and he was so enthusiastic. And then he asked, like, would it be possible to edit at the same time? And I thought, that was something that I tried to evade here. So I went back to the drawing board, started thinking on how we could implement this still in an operational transform way. And then I found a way to do it, and that started to, that's how we know how we have CodeSandbox live right now. But initially, there was so much information available. I got an information overflow, so to say.
Yeah, Kent is definitely somebody on Twitter who I've seen be very enthusiastic about CodeSandbox and specifically CodeSandbox Live. It's really cool seeing that, and even seeing him talk about using CodeSandbox as kind of a primary editor in some cases, which is really cool.
Yeah.
So there's definitely some features in there that would allow you to do that, where you could use CodeSandbox as a complete primary editor that you would use just like VS Code or others. And in fact, you've made that even easier in the most recent versions with a new experimental feature, which is VS Code running in CodeSandbox. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. This is the thing that I'm most excited about currently. I'm a big fan of VS Code, and the only reason that we were able to get VS Code working in CodeSandbox is because they have such a good infrastructure. Their code is so organized with VS Code. They even separate the files based on if they need Node utilities or not. And
oh wow!
VS Code has such a nice. Their code is very clear. So initially, I tried it before getting VS Code running in the browser, and I did it from a bottom-up approach, I believe. I just tried to run the JavaScript in the browser, and I got errors, and then I would mock the APIs of Electron and continue from there. I spent some days trying this, and it didn't really work. More and more errors were piling up, and it got more and more hacky. So the second time, I went from a top-down approach, where I tried to implement some very simple services first. Like I wanted to get the quick open working in the browser. So I just started to import that part of VS Code, and I tried to get that working. And it was interesting because I found out that Quick Open uses a lot of different services in VS Code. So it took a while to get everything. Like there were so many dependencies that Quick Open had. Like if you open Quick Open in VS Code, it has so much functionality. Like it can go through the outline view. It can run the whole command palette. It can have the Quick Open for files. It can also show a help menu to help you with if you don't know what to do with the Quick Open. Even you can go to symbols in the workspace, the install extensions. There is so much that you can do with Quick Open. So in hindsight, it wasn't the best way to start, but I got more rendering than before, and that was very promising. So I started to implement more and more of VS Code. I slowly started to replace functionality of VS Code, like the file service, with a service that's connected to CodeSandbox. So the file service would normally use FS to get all the files, and in the CodeSandbox version, it would just use the CodeSandbox state to return the files. Slowly, everything more and more started working, and I got the editor working. And the really cool thing right now is we have implemented so many different functionalities with the CodeSandbox side for VS Code that, for example, I tried last week to get the find all files working, like the search bar in CodeSandbox, search all files. And it worked on first try because it was already using the services and functionalities that I had kind of re-implemented in with the VS Code side. So it's really cool to see how this opens up. It's like a game where you unlock skills and then you get new functionality for those skills. And it's really cool to see that it now works so well. And I started doing this with the idea that I don't want to change existing code. I don't want to delete code either. So almost everything is new code added to VS Code, which makes merging with their master really easy. I don't get many merge conflicts when I merge with their master. And the last time that I merged with their master, it was a month later after the initial implementation. And it took about an hour to implement everything. So the cool thing is that whenever you see a VS Code changelog, I hope that it wouldn't take much time to implement it in CodeSandbox, and we can just kind of copy paste the VS Code changelog and make it a CodeSandbox changelog. And I'm really excited by this functionality. It's really nice.
That's great. So you'll be able to pretty quickly stay on top of new features coming down the pipe in VS Code.
Yeah.
That's really cool. And I love that that you mentioned how you got started with this idea is I'll just try and run it in the browser and see what breaks and just go from there. Like that's just such an easy response. But when you think about it, like if I were thinking about doing this, like I would stress about that so much, it seems, before I actually got into it, because I don't know, just being scared of that initial, 1,000 errors that I would probably see or something like that, just trying to run something where it wasn't meant to be run initially.
Mm-hmm.
But that's really cool. So just for my own sanity to kind of understand this better, I know that before this, CodeSandbox was using, it actually had two editor implementations, or it still has them, but it has CodeMirror and then Monaco. And Monaco is also, like, this is where I was confused a little bit initially, because Monaco is kind of the editor within VS Code, but when you're talking about adding more VS Code support, it is for things that are beyond the editor. Is that correct? A correct way of saying that?
Yeah, that's true. So Monaco it's like the core editor of VS Code, and then they started re-implementing some functionalities, like I did to make it work in the browser. They also mocked some functionality, but it's the core editor, and that already has helped me with kind of thinking on how to approach this. But with CodeSandbox, we now have something called the workbench of VS Code implemented as well. And the workbench is kind of the UI around the core editor. So, for example, the settings view or the quick open or breadcrumbs, user snippets, key bindings, command service, all those things now work directly in the browser. And that is kind of the new functionality that you get with this. And the nice thing of this is that we were able to add this functionality on top of our existing Monaco editor. So we now load the Monaco editor, but when you have VS Code enabled, we also send a separate package to the browser that enables this workbench functionality. And this package is like 320 kilobytes minified in gzip. And I think it's really cool that this functionality fits into this small size. Well, it's a pretty big size if you think about it, but the functionality that you get with it is, I think that's worth it.
Oh yeah, definitely. So Adam in the chat is saying, interesting to see if there's any overlap with Microsoft in the future. Have you had anyone from Microsoft talk about this or see this and give feedback?
Yeah, so I sent out a tweet when I just got VS Code work in the browser. I sent out a tweet and sent a video, and Kenneth of the VS Code team contacted me, and we just did a meeting to talk about how it works. And we were kind of like we were talking about how it works, and then they said if I have any questions, I can go to them and ask them. But that's kind of and I sometimes send Kenneth a message to show what we have at this point, and they're very supportive. That's really cool. They are as enthusiastic as I am with getting this working in the browser. Yeah, so I did talk a bit with them.
That's really cool and really encouraging to hear. So there's a lot of features in CodeSandbox with this, and a lot of features that we haven't even touched on yet. Most recently, So when I started looking at this, like one of the big things was being able to take the Dojo code and run it in the browser without having to do any compilation. And you make that really easy because the environment can do transpilation of TypeScript really easy in the browser and then deliver that. But you've simplified that even more, or expanded CodeSandbox's usability with pretty much anything now, it seems, with the introduction of containers. And now you can actually run code that has like build steps and deliver that. And it's all still within the same friendly CodeSandbox environment. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, because the initial version of CodeSandbox, all the code was executed in the browser. And this was really, really nice because it allowed us to bootstrap CodeSandbox kind of with low server costs. For the first year, we did everything on a $40 a month server because all the code was executed by the users. We were sort of, I don't know if you can call it Bitcoin mining, but we let the user execute the code and we don't do anything with the code. We were just a data server. And this has many advantages. You can run code offline. It's very responsive, and we can do some custom functionality. But it's also quite hacky because for example, for our Create React App template, we don't use the real Create React App to run the code. We kind of simulate the Webpack configuration in our own bundler to run the code. And this can cause some confusions at sometimes. And it also doesn't support everything because, for example, if a framework needs to use the shell, or if they need to use, for example, a node utility, then that's not possible. So we were working on something called CodeSandbox containers, where for some templates, we execute the code on the server in a container, in a Docker container. And we kind of then send the contents of what is generated by the dev server back to CodeSandbox. And that's kind of like a two-way communication. And this functionality, the whole infrastructure of this is entirely built by Bogdan. That's really cool. He's been a huge help for CodeSandbox. He also did the latest infrastructure of CodeSandbox with Kubernetes. And we've released it very recently, I think now a month ago, and we already see so many interesting things built on CodeSandbox, like Reason sandboxes. Also, React Native has been built on CodeSandbox now. We also see lots of Next, Gatsby, Nuxt templates. So we can now kind of run everything that works locally. Another cool thing is that the computation is not done in the browser anymore for those templates. So when you have not a very beefy computer, then that doesn't really matter because the yarn install, the transpilation, the bundling, all happens on an external server. So that makes it a bit easier as well.
Very cool. So just to summarize that, we can run code in the browser with all of these different templates. We can run code in containers and use the build steps if they have them for certain templates. And then also with this, you can deploy straight to Zeit's Now service. Is that correct?
Yeah. We also have a deploy functionality where you can deploy your code, production version of your code to Site Now.
That's just crazy. So you can do all of this in the browser and push to GitHub, commit to GitHub, or send a pull request. It really is a full developer environment in a browser, which is really awesome. And with that, is that kind of the motivation that you have with CodeSandbox and where it's going? Do you want it to be a competitor with more traditional offline editors like VS Code or Vim or something that I would run on my machine?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because CodeSandbox is kind of with both legs in a separate world, so to say.
Mm-hmm.
CodeSandbox is still mostly used for code prototyping. So whenever someone has a problem, or someone wants to show something, then they share it by creating a CodeSandbox or sandbox and share it with other people. But there are also people who create their whole personal website or any kind of new project on CodeSandbox. And I think both use cases are very valid. When we started CodeSandbox, we set out some goals, and these fit the goals. So the first goal was that we wanted to make it easier to get started with web development, so no local tool installation before you can get started. The second one is that we should encourage discoverability and shareability between different people. And the third one is that we wanted to have a local development experience, like as if you are in your local editor and that you can use it as your local editor. And there are some touching grounds between the two worlds. For example, when someone just gets started with web development, they probably want to start building something like a personal website. And we want to make it so that we want to not make people leave the browser. So we want to implement this functionality so that they don't have to leave the browser to build this, because then they do have to install the tooling. And we're getting there more and more with the VS Code implementation and also with the containerization. And we still have a lot to do to make it viable for full production applications. For example, CodeSandbox, I don't think CodeSandbox would be able to run in CodeSandbox right now, but that's certainly a goal that we want to achieve.
Awesome.
Yeah, that would be super cool. At the same time, we also want to make it easier for a community to start to share examples. And I think that we've been neglecting this for a while. We should definitely make it easier for people to share sandboxes within CodeSandbox. We should also make it easier for people to discover new code sandboxes, those kind of things. And that's also one of the points that we're working on. So we're working really on 2 points right now, and that's make it more viable for full-blown web application development, and also make it easier to share your sandboxes, so we can kind of create a community behind CodeSandbox.
Very cool. In the past, I've taught some workshops on development, JavaScript development, and specific frameworks or testing, things like that. And as our tool chains have gotten more complex, teaching has become a lot harder. And that has been kind of a complaint in the web world, because JavaScript was a perfect beginner language because it was just so easy to have a browser and Notepad or just a simple editor and be able to write and run code. And while you still can do that in a lot of ways, it's getting harder and harder because we have things that we need to transpile if we want to use new features, or if we want to use JSX or TypeScript or anything like that. We're introducing all of these more complex build chains. And the workshops that I was teaching, they got more complex too, where we'd have to spend more time getting people's environments set up for the workshop and making sure that everybody's on the same page with that. And that kind of can take away from the learning of everyone, because we're stuck fixing small bugs in someone's environment that's running Linux or Windows or something that we didn't test enough in. But this is really a nice kind of alternative environment for that, where you can basically code up and deliver an environment that can run exactly what you need to teach, but also you can share and you can work on it together. And there's just so many possibilities with teaching when it comes to this. So that's really cool. And it feels like it's filling in a gap that we've created by making our tool chains more complex.
It's kind of like bringing Vue source back.
Yeah.
This episode is brought to you by our friends over at .tech, a new top-level domain extension to consider when purchasing your next domain for your next big idea. .tech is a domain extension specifically intended for the tech community, and more often than not, I don't know about you, but when I search for a URL to consider for a big idea, the .com, the .net, and many others are already taken, or they're quite costly to register. So with 1 year starting at $4.99 and 5 years starting at $24.99, when you use our special code changelog, they're super affordable to grab, snag, and use. Head to get.tech to get started. Once again, get.tech to get started, and use our code changelog, or click through using the link in the show notes. And by our friends over at DigitalOcean. What we love most about DigitalOcean is one-click installs, deploys that are super easy. It doesn't really require you to know much about a server to get up and running. One-click installs for Node.js to an SSD cloud server in literally 55 seconds or even less. And the same experience you can have with a one-click install, you can have with pretty much anything you build out by taking a snapshot of your droplet. You can build out the best JavaScript app-friendly server and literally deploy it with no time at all. Manage your own stuff, run your own stuff, deploy to DigitalOcean, and make life easy for you. Head to do.co/changelog, pay less, deploy more, build better web apps with DigitalOcean, and a free $100 credit. Once again, do.co/changelog.
So there's a lot of functionality within CodeSandbox already, and things are growing. And you shared your goals, the 3 goals of where you'd like to take CodeSandbox. Along those lines, is there anything big that you're working on right now that you'd like to share?
So we just released 2 big features, and at this point, I'm kind of stabilizing those features. So we have VS Code, which is in a beta phase, and also containers, which is not stable yet. So we're trying to stabilize them right now, make them the defaults. Not for containers, by the way. We just want to stabilize containers. And I'm not working that much on new functionality right now, mostly small things of UX problems that we've had before. But we are trying to. So I did an internship at Facebook, and I finished that internship 2 months ago, I think. And at that point, I had to make the decision if I want to go full time with CodeSandbox or if I want to go work at Facebook. And I made the decision to go full time on CodeSandbox. So we're going to try to make this a viable full time business. So we're mostly we're mostly doing startup things now, like meetings, building a pitch deck, building pitches as well. It's a very different world. I think I enjoy development a bit more, but it's still interesting to experience this. So that's what I'm currently mostly kind of obsessed with.
Very cool. And that's really interesting and really exciting that you're going to be growing this and continuing it. Do you always see CodeSandbox as being an open source project?
Yeah. We'll stay true to the open source side of things.
Very cool. And with that, you said that you started this while you were attending university, and CodeSandbox has kind of exploded in popularity. It's got over 5,000 stars on GitHub for the client project. And how has that been, growing and maintaining an open source project and growing and maintaining a community around that, while also attending university and interning at Facebook and doing all of these other things?
Yeah, it's quite challenging. No, it's so in April we released CodeSandbox, and it's so hard to combine with studies. I did try to continue studies with CodeSandbox at the same time, but as CodeSandbox got more popular, my grades declined, so to say. At some point, since September 2017, so the new school year started. At that point, I only passed a few tests, and I decided to start to focus full-time on CodeSandbox last February, because at that point I was trying to combine both, and it made both not very successful, so to say. I didn't focus on one thing, which made the two other things worse. So I decided to work full-time on CodeSandbox in February, and then the internship at Facebook started, and that is also a full-time thing. So I did CodeSandbox mostly in the evenings. I had a pretty rigid schedule, but it was still very nice to work at Facebook because you were in the same world, so there was not that much context switching. I was working on the JavaScript Foundation team, so I was working on Metro, the JavaScript bundler, and it had so many parallels with CodeSandbox. That was really cool, and it's all the VS Code functionality is also built during my time at Facebook. It's a really inspirational environment, and you meet so many interesting people. So I'm really happy that I did that internship there. But my main takeaway from it is that I should have worked full time on CodeSandbox earlier. I was trying to tell myself that I could combine them, but I think I kind of knew that it was pretty impossible to combine them, and I still tried to believe it, and I kept on doing that for half a year. Only after half a year, I decided, okay, now I need to pause my study for a bit and work full time on CodeSandbox, because working on both is not getting me anywhere.
Yeah, I can't even imagine the strain of that. So that's understandable for sure, and it definitely allows you to focus more on features. And now growing CodeSandbox into a full business is really cool. How has it been maintaining an open source community? Is this kind of the first big or larger community that you have kind of fostered and maintained?
Yeah. This is really my first open source project, I'd say. I can be pretty bad at it because I am someone who likes to focus on one thing and then let everything around it go. That's also why my study and CodeSandbox didn't work well together. So, for example, when I was working on CodeSandbox Live, I was just working full-time on this feature and didn't want any distraction. So I didn't check my GitHub for 4 days or something, 5 days. That's not a good habit to have to build a community. And I started to get better at it, keep more up to date with the issues. But it takes a lot of time too. But it also bears its fruits, so to say, because we've had so many different contributions in open source right now, and CodeSandbox has benefited so much from the contributions, and that's really cool. I'm very happy that we decided to go open source with this, because this open source project has, there is now a community behind it. There are people who contribute often. We have core contributors, and this definitely reduces some strain to development.
Very cool. And from my experience, contributing to the project has been very pleasant. You've always been very quick and cheerful with things that we want to do, like bring Dojo to it or other fixes. And so that's definitely very much appreciated. And I also noticed that this was the first project that I had contributed to that uses, and I can't remember the name of it, but it basically allows you to become to add your name and your picture from GitHub to the contributors list, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah, that's such a cool tool. It's built by Kenzie Dodds, and the nice thing about it is that you can also add yourself as a contributor when you haven't contributed code. For example, if you have contributed to the docs, we can still put you on the README file, or if you have contributed with an idea, for example, it's a way to also acknowledge people who don't write code for you but help you in another way. And I think that's a really good idea. Yeah,
and it's also can be very motivating for someone to say, like not necessarily that they would contribute just to get their picture on there, but to be able to say, oh, I'm on the CodeSandbox client README. That's really cool. And can be a good motivator, I suppose. If things like Hacktoberfest work, that can definitely work as well, which is really cool because it's all positive.
Yeah, and we also highlighted on CodeSandbox itself, when you are a contributor, we show a small icon next to your username where it says, this is a contributor to CodeSandbox.
I noticed I have a little, I think it's a hard hat icon.
Yep.
That's really cool. But there are other ways to support CodeSandbox, and there's this idea of becoming a patron where you actually donate or pay monthly to CodeSandbox, and you get a little bit more features and functionality, like things like private sandboxes and other things. What's the conversion like that been?
I'd say we have I don't think we have a very high conversion. We have many people who go to the website and create an account, but not that many who become patrons. It's funny because we can see a direct correlation between features that we enable for patrons and how many patrons we get. For example, at the start, when CodeSandbox just got CodeSandbox Live, we only enabled it for patrons because we wanted to handle the load. And suddenly we saw like 4 or 5 times increase in patrons a day. And that was so interesting to see. And then we removed the feature for patrons. Well, we made it available for everyone, and suddenly our patrons per day went down too. That's really interesting to see. But we don't want to, at least I don't want to build features for a small percentage of our users. So that's why I'm always leaning towards building it for everyone. And the nice thing is patrons generate us enough money to pay for our server costs. So we don't have really a burn rate. And that allows us to kind of survive. So I'm super happy with this patron feature, because also now most people that pay for patron, or they want private sandboxes, or they like the project so much that they want to support it. And I think that's knowing that's really nice.
Yeah, that's such a great way to give back to open source. So it's definitely appreciated. And there's so many features that a project like CodeSandbox has that it definitely makes sense to give back, either in code or filing bugs or becoming a patron. So that's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
So what motivates you with CodeSandbox and like motivates the future of it, with what you like to see added to it, what you wish you could change?
I am most motivated by lots of people using it. I really like to see how many people use it. I also like to see everything that has been created on CodeSandbox. It's today for CodeSandbox we did our first thing on our Twitter account where we kind of send out the 5 most popular sandboxes of the past week. And I think that we should
Oh, cool.
do this far more often. We should make it easy for people to explore what has been created, because we now have this gold mine of information. Recently, we hit the 1 million sandboxes milestone, and we can now just we should use this information and to inspire people to help them find new popular sandboxes, or maybe share sandbox within CodeSandbox. So the thing that I'm most excited about in the future is enabling people to collaborate, make it easier for people to collaborate, kind of connect people to work on the different sandboxes together. Also, to help them explore the new sandboxes. Kind of, we should be like a valuable tool for the ecosystem to find inspiration or to find new ideas. And we're currently lacking on it. We have a good editor experience, but we don't have a good exploration. So that's something that I'm super excited about to get into the short term. In the long term, we should have an editor that is viable for creating any kind of project, and we should have it connected to containers. And from then on, every computer that you will see is your development environment. Because when you just get some random computer, open CodeSandbox, you can continue working on your project. Or you get this other random computer, even if it's like $100 Chromebook and it doesn't have any specs. We use cloud computing, so the CodeSandbox containers, to execute the code. So it doesn't need resources. So imagine that you can just see every device that you have as your development device. That is such a powerful idea. And in the long term, I want to get this.
Yeah, that's really cool. And that's a good thing to mention, is that it can run anywhere. And I've used it on an iPad before, and it's a good environment on there. I have problems with the keyboard on the iPad, but that's about it. But those aren't your problems. And so it's just really cool. And with that, there's really no limit to where you can run it. You can run it on really cheap laptops or very expensive equipment, and it works all the same. So that's really cool. With that kind of expansion that you were talking about, did you mean expansion into other languages as well, besides just being a front-end development tool?
Yeah, we kind of have the same mantra, so to say. We want to make the JavaScript experience super good. And once we get that super good, we want to explore adding more languages.
Very cool. So there's definitely other tools like this out there. And you recently had a blog post kind of about this and how comparing CodeSandbox to those other tools is kind of demotivating. And I totally agree with that. And instead, you focused on some of the big features that CodeSandbox has and talked about that. That's a really cool, positive way of talking about that and distinguishing CodeSandbox, I think. So that's really cool. And also one other thing that I learned, I did not realize that CodeSandbox had a CLI tool that you could import projects with. But I think that tools like that and knowing that and being able to run any project is just going to be so big for CodeSandbox going forward, because you'll be able to share anything, and the tight integration that you have with GitHub and being able to really take potentially any repo in the future and being able to run it in this environment and edit and then commit back all within CodeSandbox. I think that's going to be such a huge feature of it going forward, is just the interoperability and ease of being able to go where the code is, which is GitHub in many cases, and then get it running, which can be like deploying it right from within the tool.
Yeah, I agree. The accessibility is really important here, that it's easy to get started with your existing code. That's something that I'm super excited about as well.
So is there anything else that you'd like to chat with us about CodeSandbox that we haven't covered?
There is one feature that came to mind, which I'm super enthusiastic about, but nobody really notices it, which is a good thing. But I still want to talk about it someday. So maybe I can talk about it now.
Sure.
Okay. So for most projects, we execute the code in the browser. And sometimes people experience this as slow. Imagine that you have a project with Webpack. You expect it to boot up within only after like 40 seconds, for example, or 30 seconds. and that's even fast. But if you go to a website, you suddenly expect the project to show in 3 seconds. You don't have the 30, 40 seconds to let this transpile. And we were often pretty fast with transpiling the code because we use web workers to transpile everything. So we try to parallelize everything, but sometimes it can be a bit slow. So we now have, whenever someone loads a project, a sandbox project, we cache the bundler result, like the transpiled files, the dependency graph, etc. We kind of put it in the browser in IndexedDB, and we also send it to our API. So CodeSandbox has one Redis cache with all different compilation results of sandboxes, like transpilation results, etc. And we have a very cool way of invalidating this cache. But for example, when someone loads a sandbox and then sends the compilation result to the server, then when the next person loads this sandbox, we just send this transpilation result back to the user, and they don't have to transpile anything. So we have kind of like have a cache for all the sandbox projects, for all the compilation results hosted on our server. It's kind of like, I think that's a super cool idea, like that you can cache your bundler results. And I know that Metro is also exploring these ideas a lot, and they're very good at it. But in this case, we're trying to cache all the projects that have been created on CodeSandbox and make it easier for people that if they open a sandbox, that they don't have to do any computing. We pre-computed everything that takes a lot of resources.
Very cool. Where can people reach you at, Ives?
Oh, I'm on Twitter. So it's Compu, COMPU, and then Ives, IVES. Oh, I have a new email since this week. It's ives@codesandbox.io. So if people want to reach me that way, that works as well.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. It was you're a very good host.
All right, thank you for tuning in to JS Party this week. Tuning live on Thursdays at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern at changelog.com/live. Join the community and Slack with us in real time during the shows. Head to changelog.com/community. And do us a favor, share this show with a friend, rate us on Apple Podcast, go into Overcast and favorite it. And thank you to Fastly, our bandwidth partner. Head to fastly.com to learn more. And we move fast to fix things around here at Changelog because of Rollbar. Check them out at rollbar.com. We're hosted on Linode Cloud servers. Head to linode.com/changelog. Check them out and support this show. Our music is produced by Breakmaster Cylinder. And you can find more shows just like this at changelog.com. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week.